materialized that very evening at tea. Pavel Petrovich came into the drawing room all keyed up, irritable and determined. He was only waiting for a pretext to pounce upon his enemy, but for some time no such pretext arose. As a rule, Bazarov spoke little in the presence of the old Kirsanovs, that was what he called the brothers, and that evening he felt in a bad humor and drank cup after cup of tea without saying a word. Pavel Petrovich was burning with impatience. His wishes were fulfilled at last. The conversation turned to one of the neighboring landowners. "Rotten aristocratic snob," observed Bazarov casually. He had met him in Petersburg. "Allow me to ask you," began Pavel Petrovich, and his lips were trembling, "do you attach an identical meaning to the words 'rotten' and 'aristocrat'?" "I said aristocratic snob," replied Bazarov, lazily swallowing a sip of tea. "Precisely, but I imagine you hold the same opinion of aristocrats as of aristocratic snobs. I think it my duty to tell you that I do not share that opinion. I venture to say that I am well known to be a man of liberal views and devoted to progress, but for that very reason I respect aristocrats, real aristocrats. Kindly remember, sir," at these words Bazarov lifted his eyes and looked at Pavel Petrovich. "Kindly remember, sir," he repeated sharply, "the English aristocracy. They did not abandon one iota of their rights, and for that reason they respect the rights of others. They demand the fulfillment of what is due to them, and therefore they respect their own duties. The aristocracy gave freedom to England, and they maintain it for her." "We've heard that story many times. What are you trying to prove by it?" "I am trying to prove by that, sir," when Pavel Petrovich became angry, he intentionally clipped his words, though of course he knew very well that such forms are not strictly grammatical. This whim indicated a survival from the period of Alexander I. The great ones of that time, on the rare occasions when they spoke their own language, made use of such distortions as if seeking to show thereby that though they were genuine Russians, yet at the same time as grands seigneurs they could afford to ignore the grammatical rules of scholars. "I am trying to prove by that, sir, that without a sense of personal dignity, without self-respect, and these two feelings are developed in the aristocrat, there is no firm foundation for the social bien public, for the social structure. Personal character, my good sir, that is the chief thing. A man's personality must be as strong as a rock, since everything else is built up on it. I am well aware, for instance, that you choose to consider my habits, my dress, even my tidiness, ridiculous, but all this comes from a sense of self-respect and of duty, yes, from a sense of duty. I live in the wilds of the country, but I refuse to lower myself. I respect the dignity of man in myself." "Let me ask you, Pavel Petrovich," muttered Bazarov, "you respect yourself and you sit with folded hands. What sort of benefit is that to the bien public? If you didn't respect yourself, you'd do just the same." Pavel Petrovich turned pale. "That is quite another question. There is absolutely no need for me to explain to you now why I sit here with folded hands, as you are pleased to express yourself. I wish only to tell you that aristocracy is a principle, and that only depraved or stupid people can live in our time without principles. I said as much to Arkady the day after he came home, and I repeat it to you now. Isn't that so, Nikolai?" Nikolai Petrovich nodded his head. "Aristocracy, liberalism, progress, principles said Bazarov. "Just think what a lot of foreign and useless words. To a Russian they're no good for anything." "What is good for Russians, according to you? If we listen to you, we shall find ourselves beyond the pale of humanity, outside human laws. Doesn't the logic of history demand—" "What's the use of that logic to us? We can get along without it." "What do you mean?" "Why, this: you don't need logic, I suppose, to put a piece of bread in your mouth when you're hungry. For what do we need those abstractions?" Pavel Petrovich raised his hands. "I simply don't understand you after all that. You insult the Russian people. I fail to understand how it is possible not to acknowledge principles, rules. By virtue of what can you act?" "I already told you, uncle dear, that we don't recognize any authorities," interposed Arkady. "We act by virtue of what we recognize as useful," went on Bazarov. "At present the most useful thing is denial, so we deny—" "Everything?" "Everything." "What? Not only art, poetry? But the thought is appalling." "Everything," repeated Bazarov with indescribable composure. Pavel Petrovich stared at him. He had not expected this, and Arkady even blushed with satisfaction. "But allow me," began Nikolai Petrovich. "You deny everything, or to put it more precisely, you destroy everything. But one must construct too, you know." "That is not our business. We must first clear the ground." "The present condition of the people demands it," added Arkady rather sententiously. "We must fulfill those demands, we have no right to yield to the satisfaction of personal egotism." That last phrase obviously displeased Bazarov; it smacked of philosophy or romanticism, for Bazarov called philosophy a kind of romanticism, but he did not judge it necessary to correct his young disciple. "No, no," cried Pavel Petrovich with sudden vehemence. "I can't believe that you young men really know the Russian people, that you represent their needs and aspirations. No, the Russian people are not what you imagine them to be. They hold traditions sacred; they are a patriarchal people, they cannot live without faith—" "I'm not going to argue with you," interrupted Bazarov. "I'm even ready to agree that there you are right." "And if I am right—" "It proves nothing, all the same." "Exactly, it proves nothing," repeated Arkady with the assurance of an experienced chess player, who, having foreseen an apparently dangerous move on the part of his adversary, is not in the least put out by it. "How can it prove nothing?" mumbled Pavel Petrovich in consternation. "In that case you must be going against your own people." "And what if we are?" exclaimed Bazarov. "The people imagine that when it thunders the prophet Ilya is riding across the sky in his chariot. What then? Are we to agree with them? Besides, if they are Russian, so am I." "No, you are not a Russian, after what you have said. I can't admit you have any right to call yourself a Russian." "My grandfather plowed the land," answered Bazarov with haughty pride. "Ask any one of your peasants which of us, you or me, he would more readily acknowledge as a fellow countryman. You don't even know how to talk to them." "While you talk to them and despise them at the same time?" "What of that, if they deserve contempt? You find fault with my point of view, but what makes you think it came into being by chance, that it's not a product of that very national spirit which you are championing?" "What an idea! How can we need nihilists?" Whether they are needed or not is not for us to